Okay, this is part one of our neutral nature project, assignment 2. We're going to start with what's known as a toned canvas. So I'm mixing equal parts of my raw umber and burnt sienna, about a dime size. It gives me a pretty dark, middle dark color. That's my offset palette knife, and I'm mixing it together, scraping it off my brush, trying to get it into a pile so that it doesn't dry out. You don't want to spread it out. Now I'm trying to lift it to about a middle gray tone. So I'm adding white, scraping it into a pile. And you want to make certain that you compare it to a middle gray, which I did there. And I want to lighten it just a little bit. And again, you always want to scrape it into a pile. The more of a pile you have, the less likely it's going to dry out. Now I'm checking it again. Looks pretty good. Wiping off my brush. Make sure you clean off the ferrule. You don't want paint getting down into that metal bit. I'm putting a little bit of water and spreading it. If I spread it too thin, you'll start to see the canvas. So you want to just keep layering it on, almost like you're putting bricks down. Just a little bit of water goes a long way. Keep pulling from my clean water. Not too thin. If you make it too thin, it'll start to pull apart, and you'll be able to see your palette through the paint, the wash. This is not a wash, this is an opaque tonal layer. I'm going up and down in vertical strokes to kind of keep it spread evenly. Then I go in a vertical, then a horizontal, then a vertical again. That distributes my paint as evenly as possible. Then I put water down and clean up my palette, clean off my brush. All right, now for the next phase, this is what your tonal canvas should look like. You start with burnt umber, a little bit of water, and this is how you do your underdrawing. You don't do it with pencil, you do it with paint. This is traditionally how artists do it. So I'm just doing a linear drawing, very loose. I'm using my smaller square brush because that gives me a nice focused hard edge line. This isn't about color, this is just about line. Then we move into our roughen phase. This is like what we did in our previous project, where we do value. So you can see I'm looking for the light and the shadow, mixing more or less water in. Now with this complicated wreath of vines, I'm just doing a lot of black, and I'm looking for the large areas of dark. I'm not overly worried with perfection at this point, but I am trying to get a general sense of where everything is. Adding more water gives me a nice middle kind of gray, dark gray tone for the top of that basket. Still doing some linear work. And I add more water to give myself a nice middle gray wash. Now I'm not doing anything in the background other than just toning it down. I'm not dealing with that stool or the floor. Notice how the greater the wash, the lighter the tone. That way my basket front stands out from my basket top. Candle's pretty light. you squint, you can see that it's pretty light. About the same value as the front of the basket when you're squinting. And I'm just working back and forth between different darknesses of wash in the raw umber. Pushing that background a little darker. Now I'm putting in some really dark tones. Almost pure umber at this point. But again, it's loose. You can see how by toning that background down, the lighter tone, that middle gray tone of the canvas, really starts to become brighter. And you can see that I'm working back and forth between line and tone, adjusting shape. Now I'm wiping off my palette again, dipped my rag in water. Now I'm putting out some burnt sienna and some white and some black. Now when you're doing this, what you're doing is you're looking for, what objects can be a warmer gray and what objects can be a cooler gray. What objects can be the sienna color and what objects can be the umber color. So I've kind of decided the basket is going to be in my burnt sienna. You can see I created a little grayscale from the middle burnt sienna to the black and from the middle burnt sienna to the white. The top will be the darkest, the front will be more of a middle tone, and you can see I just keep going back and forth to my paint. I'm not spreading it out thin, mixing a slightly lighter tone for the rim of that basket. What we're doing is we're making guesses, drawing right over the edge of that shell, blending in a little dark for the turn of the corner, and for the top of the rim of the basket. Putting in some lighter areas in the top of the basket so I get a shadow, a gradation. Wiping off my brush, reinforcing the rim. If that rim front is too light, then I can always come back and darken it. Right now we're making guesses and trying to get the whole thing covered, just like we did in the last painting, in layer 3. Now I'm mixing up my umber, and you can see that it's a lot grayer. So I decided to make my shell in that umber family. What you're going for is contrast here. So if you've got a sienna shape against a sienna shape, it's not going to stand out as much as if you have an umber shape against a sienna shape. And you can see it created a little gradation here too. That umber is very close to black. Eventually I'll mix some black with that umber. But for now I can go in with the umber. Now the duck is kind of multiple colors. The head is red, the body's more of a umber. So the head would be more sienna, the body would be more umber. And again, you're just trying to build up a layer. I am dealing with shadows and light, obviously, and continuing to adjust shape. You'll notice that I did the back of the duck over the head of the duck. You also notice how far back I'm holding the brush. That makes blending a lot easier. I'll probably adjust and readjust that bill 1,000 times, working behind the bill and in front of the bill. Now I'm going back to the sienna for the head. You can see how it's a very different warmth, very different hue, very reddish, very orangish compared to the kind of gray green of the raw sienna. Actually, believe it or not, raw sienna is in the yellow family. Raw umber is in the yellow family. Burnt umber would be in the red family, like burnt sienna. But one thing that's very important is that you don't mix black with the tints that you've made of the umbers, or the tints, T-I-N-T-S, that you've made of the siennas. That'll give you a murky color. So I'm very much staying within the little scales from white to sienna to black, from white to umber to black, and pulling from them. And this is why it's so important that you mix your paint into these little gray scales ahead of time. Now, with this mess of vines, what I'm doing is I'm painting the negative dark behind the negative or the positive light. There's no sense in painting the light vines and then putting the dark in between them. That would drive you crazy. So what I do is what's called an under shadow. Same thing you would do in a tree. You can see I'm just working back and forth, again treating my edges really loose and pulling and pushing. Doing some texture. Putting some more black down. Here I'm wiping off the rim. Sometimes you get paint gunked up and it makes it hard for the lid to go back on. So wiping off the edge of the paint tube opening will keep it from making it difficult to keep it airtight. So I've decided that the candle itself is going to be in the sienna family and the wood is going to be in the umber family. Again, you're thinking about contrast. Now, I originally thought of the wreath of vines as being in the raw umber family, but I think eventually, since it's next to the gray of the sticks that are holding that candle, the umber of the sticks that are holding that candle, that I might eventually use some sienna for the light. Notice how I'm painting right over that original candle painting. Don't treat things too precious. They might look good at first, but that doesn't mean that you want to keep them that way, because sometimes it makes life more difficult. It makes life easier if you hold on loosely to your original shapes. Putting in some spots, darker gray. Notice I keep cleaning off my brush. I know you can't see my cups, but every time I switch from one tone, the sienna, to the other tone, umber, I'm cleaning off my brush. Now I'm using the edge of my brush to do some linear work in the shell. Doing some texture light in the front of the duck. Might be too light, but I can always go back and make it darker. Right now in this layer 3 layer overpainting with opaque paint, it's just about getting the color down and making adjustments later. In fact, I'm probably doing too much detail at this point, but it doesn't hurt to get started with it, as long as you realize you can go back and adjust it later. Again, I want to remind you, don't mix black in to the left of your middle value or your raw paint color. That'll give you some really ugly, gray, dead colors. So remember, I said I was going to make the candles in the sienna family, so I'm putting down kind of a middle tone of sienna, painting right over the edge of the sticks, and then putting in a tint. Again, a tint is the raw sienna mixed with white, or the burnt sienna mixed with white, or the raw umber mixed with white. Those are all tints. T-I-N-T-S. But why would I want to paint that candle in between the sticks? That would drive me crazy. That's like painting the dark in between the vines in that wreath of vines. You can still see where the sticks come in and come out. Tinting it up a little bit to get that reflection. Darkening in the inside of the candle. You got to paint smartly. Painting in the handle of that bucket that's in the background. I haven't really touched the negative space very much, but I will. I could have. I just haven't yet. Cleaning off my brush again. Bringing the stick back over the edge of the candle, over the edge of the vines. Then pulling some light in. And pushing some dark in and blending the transition from light to dark. Remember, you blend vertically along the edges of the two different lights, the light and the dark, the two different values, I should say. Now I'm using my number 2 brush, round, and I'm pulling in some umber. Middle gray at first, and then some lighter gray. And you can see I'm kind of flicking my brush, and that, where I put my brush down with more pressure, gives me a lighter tone, and as I pull up, it gradates or modulates into the darker tone. Reshaping the duck's tail, pulling it over the handle, where I pulled the handle over. Now I'm kind of playing around with maybe some warmer tones of that sienna for the lights. You can see how it's really becoming dimensional now. But I'm not just painting over everything. I'm using smaller marks. Remember, you go from bigger marks to smaller marks. Making some adjustments. Putting in some wood grain with some more stronger sienna. And some lights again. So you want to have both colors on simultaneously. Reshaping the shell. I'm going to have to reshape that shell further in the last layer, layer 4. Which of course is the detail layer. So this is about where we're going to be by the end of the next class. So we haven't covered everything, but we're pretty close. Really all I'm missing is that background shape. There's some adjustments that I want to make as far as the shapes are concerned. But for now, I think we're in good shape.